Jason walked into the courtroom with the confident stride I'd witnessed countless times during our marriage. Designer suit perfectly tailored, hair expertly styled, that practiced smile that had charmed boardrooms and bedrooms alike. His eyes briefly met mine across the room, a flicker of smugness passing over his features before he turned to greet his mother and sister with theatrical embraces. I remained seated beside my attorney, Ellen, my hands folded calmly in my lap, despite the storm of emotions churning beneath my composed exterior. 3 years of calculated deception had led us to this moment, the final hearing that would determine how our assets would be divided, how our life together would be officially dismantled. "Remember," Ellen whispered, "no matter what he says, stay calm." "We've prepared for this." I nodded, watching as Jason's family arranged themselves directly behind him in the gallery. A united front, or so he believed. His confidence was palpable, radiating from him in waves as he leaned over to whisper something to his attorney. He genuinely thought today would be his victory lap. He had no idea what was coming. The judge entered, and we all rose. As the proceedings began, I caught Jason watching me from the corner of his eye, likely trying to gauge my emotional state. I gave him nothing. The vulnerable woman who had once believed his every word, who had made excuses for his absences and overlooked the inconsistencies in his stories, had disappeared months ago. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had finally recognized her own worth. When the judge invited Jason's mother to approach for her statement, I saw the slight nod Jason gave her, the encouraging smile. He truly believed she was there to support him, to paint me as the unreasonable, unstable wife who wanted to ruin her precious son. The look of absolute shock on his face when she began to speak was almost worth the 3 years of betrayal that had brought us here. "My name is Olivia Barrett, Olivia Reynolds before I married Jason. I'm 34 years old, a marketing director for a healthcare technology company in Chicago's River North District. At least, that's who I am now. For the past 7 years, 5 dating, 2 married, I was primarily Jason's wife, a role that gradually consumed my identity in ways I didn't fully recognize until it was almost too late. We met at a charity gala where I was coordinating the silent auction. Jason approached with 2 glasses of champagne and a compliment about my organizational skills, an unexpected opening line that caught my attention. He was handsome in the conventional sense, tall, with dark hair and the kind of smile that photographs well. But it was his apparent interest in my work, the thoughtful questions he asked about event planning and nonprofit development, that truly drew me in. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, and grand romantic gestures. When he proposed after just 8 months, friends expressed concerns about the pace, but I dismissed them. Jason was attentive, successful, and seemingly transparent about his life and ambitions. He wanted a partnership, he said. Equal footing, mutual respect. Looking back, I should have recognized the subtle shift that began after we moved in together. The small criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions, the increasing control over our social calendar, the gradual isolation from friends who weren't good for us. But love can be a powerful filter, turning red flags into romantic challenges to overcome together. By the time we married in a lavish ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden, I had already begun to shrink myself to fit within the margins of the life Jason had outlined for us. I just didn't realize it yet. The court reporter's typing created a soft, rhythmic backdrop as Jason's mother, Eleanor Barrett, adjusted the microphone. A elegant woman in her early 60s with impeccable style and the same confident posture as her son, she had always maintained a polite but distant relationship with me. Family dinners at their Lake Forest home had been exercises in restrained conversation and careful etiquette. "Mrs. Barrett," the judge prompted, "please share your statement with the court." Eleanor cleared her throat. "I've known Olivia for 7 years now, since Jason first brought her home to meet us. She has always conducted herself with dignity and grace, even in difficult circumstances." Jason's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the beginning he had expected. Over the past 3 years, Eleanor continued, I've watched my son systematically deceive his wife while presenting himself as the victim of her supposed unreasonableness. I've witnessed him manipulate situations, gaslight her about events I personally observed, and create elaborate fictions to cover his infidelities. Jason's attorney straightened, alarm crossing his features. Jason himself had gone completely still, the color draining from his face. Mother, he began, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Mrs. Barrett, these are serious allegations against your son. Are you certain of what you're stating? The judge asked. Entirely certain, Your Honor. Eleanor's voice remained steady. I have documentation, text messages, emails, photographs, that corroborate what I'm telling you. I provided these to Olivia's attorney last month, and I believe they've been submitted as evidence. Ellen nodded, patting the folder before her. Exhibits 23 through 37. Your Honor. I kept my eyes forward, not daring to look at Jason. I had waited months for this moment, ever since Eleanor had contacted me privately with an unexpected offer of support. I can't stand by and watch him do to you what his father did to me, she had said during our secret meeting at a quiet cafe in Evanston. It ends now. Eleanor continued her testimony, methodically outlining instances she had personally witnessed. Jason's calculated lies about working late when he was actually with other women. His deliberate gaslighting when I questioned discrepancies in his stories. His gradual isolation of me from my support network. The final straw for me, she said, her composure finally cracking slightly, was when I overheard my son on the phone last Christmas, laughing about how he had hidden assets in a separate account and planned to leave his wife with nothing. She'll never know what hit her, he said. I raised him better than that, and I cannot in good conscience remain silent. By now, Jason's attorney was frantically scribbling notes, occasionally leaning over to whisper urgently to his client. Jason himself sat rigid, his earlier confidence shattered, occasionally shaking his head in mute denial. When Eleanor finished her statement and returned to her seat, she did not sit behind Jason again. Instead, she moved to sit directly behind me, a symbolic shift that sent murmurs through the small courtroom. Next came Jason's sister, Meredith, whose testimony proved equally damaging. She described conversations where Jason had bragged about keeping separate financial records, about property purchased under a business associate's name to shield it from me in the event of divorce. He told me it was just smart financial planning, Meredith testified. But when I asked why Olivia wasn't aware of these arrangements, he just laughed and said, "What she doesn't know won't hurt her. It didn't sit right with me then, and it doesn't sit right with me now." By the time Jason's family members had finished speaking, the judge's expression had grown increasingly grave. The narrative Jason had carefully constructed, of a reasonable businessman protecting himself from an emotional, unpredictable wife, was unraveling thread by thread. When it was finally Jason's turn to testify, he had regained some of his composure, though his earlier confidence had been replaced by a tightly controlled anger. He denied everything, of course, claimed his mother and sister were conspiring with me for unknown reasons, insisted that the documented evidence had been manipulated or taken out of context. "Your Honor," he said, his voice strained despite his efforts to appear calm, "I've been nothing but a devoted husband." Olivia became increasingly paranoid and suspicious over the past year. She turned my family against me with her accusations. These alleged hidden assets simply don't exist. The judge listened impassively, then turned to me. "Mrs. Barrett, would you like to make a statement at this time?" I stood, smoothing the jacket of my simple navy suit. For weeks, I had rehearsed what I might say in this moment. Imagined laying bare every hurt, every betrayal, every moment of self-doubt Jason had inflicted. But standing there, Seeing him reduced from the powerful manipulator who had controlled my life to a desperate man caught in his own web of lies, I found I needed fewer words than expected. Your Honor, I entered my marriage in good faith, believing in the partnership Jason promised. When I began to suspect he wasn't being truthful about our finances or his fidelity, he convinced me I was imagining things, that I was being irrational and untrusting. For too long, I believed him instead of my own perceptions. I paused, looking directly at Jason for the first time that day. His jaw was clenched, his eyes hard. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice and a fair division of the assets we built together during our marriage. The documentation we've provided speaks for itself. I have nothing further to add. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Given the evidence presented today, particularly the testimony regarding potentially hidden assets, I'm ordering a complete forensic accounting of all accounts and properties associated with Mr. Barrett, including those held through business associates or shell companies. Jason's attorney began to protest, but the judge continued. Additionally, based on the credible testimony regarding Mr. Barrett's attempts to shield assets from this proceeding, I'm issuing a temporary freeze on all accounts identified in Exhibits 30 through 37 pending the completion of the forensic accounting. As the judge outlined further procedural details, I felt a weight lifting, not completely, but significantly. For years, I had doubted my own perceptions, questioned my own memory, wondered if I was indeed as unstable and paranoid as Jason claimed. Today, in this courtroom, with the unexpected support of his own family, my reality had been validated. When the hearing adjourned, Jason strode directly toward his mother and sister, his face contorted with rage. "How could you?" he hissed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "My own family? After everything I've done for you?" Eleanor stood her ground, meeting her son's gaze with remarkable composure. "I did what you left me no choice but to do. You've become your father, Jason, and I won't enable it any longer." Court officers moved closer, clearly concerned about Jason's aggressive posture. His attorney grabbed his arm, murmuring urgent warnings about his behavior affecting the judge's final decision. I gathered my things quietly, avoiding the confrontation. Ellen guided me toward a side exit, her hand supportive on my elbow. "That went better than we could have hoped," she whispered. His family's testimony was devastating to his case. Outside the courthouse, the September air held the first hint of autumn crispness. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the promise of change. 3 years of confusion and self-doubt were beginning to crystallize into something clearer, something I could finally begin to process and move beyond. Eleanor caught up with us at the bottom of the courthouse steps. "Olivia!" she called, slightly out of breath. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Ellen gave me a questioning look. "I'll be right over there if you need me," she said, stepping away to give us privacy. "Thank you," I said simply when Eleanor reached me. I know how difficult that must have been. Eleanor's carefully maintained composure wavered slightly. "I should have said something sooner. I saw the signs, recognized the patterns, but he's my son. I kept hoping he would change." "You spoke up when it mattered most," I assured her, surprised by my own capacity for empathy toward her despite everything. That took courage. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small leather journal. "I found this in Jason's old room when I was cleaning out some things last month. It's from right after you were married." She handed it to me, her expression solemn. "I hesitated about whether to share it with you, but I think it might help you understand that none of this was your fault. The deception began from the very start." I took the journal, uncertain. "Are you sure you want me to have this?" "Absolutely certain. What you choose to do with it is up to you." She glanced back toward the courthouse doors. "I should go check on Meredith. Jason was not kind to her after the hearing." We parted with an awkward half-hug. This woman, who had been my mother-in-law, now transformed into an unexpected ally in the dismantling of her son's carefully constructed facade. The apartment I had moved into 3 months earlier was small, but entirely mine. A one-bedroom in Bucktown with hardwood floors, large windows, and no memories of Jason. I had furnished it simply, partly due to financial uncertainty during the divorce proceedings, and partly from a desire to shed the ostentatious aesthetic Jason had always preferred. I set my keys and bag on the kitchen counter, made a cup of tea, and sat at my small dining table with Jason's journal. For several minutes, I simply stared at the worn leather cover, uncertain whether reading it would provide closure or simply reopen wounds beginning to heal. Curiosity finally won out. I opened to the first page, dated 2 weeks after our wedding. "Married life suits me better than I expected," Jason had written in his precise handwriting. "Olivia is the perfect front. Smart enough to hold conversations with clients and colleagues, attractive enough to be an asset at events, but insecure enough to be manageable. Mother seems to like her, which helps with the family image. The prenup is solid. Phillips assured me it's practically unbreakable if handled correctly. Now to begin phase 2 of the plan." My hand shook slightly as I turned to the next entry, dated a few weeks later. "Successfully convinced O to decline the marketing director position at Lakeshore Health. Made her believe it would be too much stress and would damage our newlywed time together. The real issue, of course, is that it would have given her too much financial independence and professional confidence. Better to keep her focused on supporting my career. Suggested instead that she take the part-time consulting role that keeps her busy enough to feel productive, but not so successful that she develops too much autonomy." I remembered that conversation vividly, how understanding and concerned Jason had seemed about my work-life balance, how he had framed his suggestion as prioritizing our relationship during that special newlywed period. I had been disappointed to decline the director position, but touched by his apparent devotion to our marriage. In reality, it had been the first major step in his campaign to undermine my independence. Entry after entry detailed his calculated efforts to isolate me from friends who asked too many questions, his deliberate triggering of my insecurities to make me more dependent on his validation, his careful construction of situations designed to make me doubt my own perceptions when I began to question his late nights or unexplained expenses. Midway through the journal, the entries became more focused on financial matters. Accounts opened in business associates' names, property purchased through shell companies, systematic plans to shield assets from being considered marital property. "O has no idea about the Cayman account," one entry read. "By the time the marriage has served its purpose in a few years, I'll have enough set aside that she'll get practically nothing in the divorce, regardless of what the prenup specifies. Richardson has been invaluable in setting up the offshore structure." I closed the journal, unable to read more. Part of me had still harbored doubts, wondering if I had somehow contributed to the breakdown of our marriage, if I had indeed been as irrational or demanding as Jason often claimed. The journal erased those doubts with brutal clarity. Our entire relationship had been a tactical operation on his part, a means to an end rather than the partnership I had believed in so completely. I made another cup of tea and moved to the window seat that had become my favorite spot in the new apartment. Outside, the street was coming alive with early evening energy. People returning from work, stopping at the corner market, walking dogs, normal lives unfolding in their own complex patterns. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Denise. "Heard the hearing went well. Dinner tonight to celebrate?" I smiled, grateful for the friends who had remained steadfast despite Jason's efforts to isolate me. "Yes?" I typed back. "Piccolo's at 7?" Setting the phone aside, I glanced at the journal on the table. I could use it in the ongoing divorce proceedings, certainly. Ellen would likely consider it valuable evidence of Jason's intent to hide assets and deceive the court. But something in me hesitated, wondering if continuing to engage with the toxic content would only prolong my healing process. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Jason standing in the hallway, his earlier courtroom composure now completely abandoned. His tie was loosened, hair disheveled, eyes slightly wild. "I know you're in there, Olivia," he called, his voice just short of a shout. "We need to talk." I stood silently, my heart racing despite my efforts to remain calm. This was exactly why I hadn't given him my new address. Why I had been so careful about establishing boundaries during the separation. "Olivia, please." His voice dropped, taking on the persuasive tone I had fallen for countless times before. "There's been a huge misunderstanding. My mother and Meredith, they've got it all wrong. Let me explain." I took out my phone and texted my neighbor across the hall, a retired police officer who had kindly offered his support if Jason ever showed up. "He's here, outside my door now." Within moments, I heard another door open and Tom's steady voice. "Everything okay out here, sir?" "This is a private matter," Jason replied, his tone instantly shifting to one of irritation. "I'm trying to speak with my wife. Ms. Reynolds has made it clear she doesn't want visitors," Tom said calmly. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the building." "Do you know who I am?" Jason's voice took on the imperious tone he used when his authority was challenged. "This is between me and my wife. I know exactly who you are," Tom replied, unimpressed. "And I also know there's a temporary restraining order that says you need to stay at least 100 feet away from Ms. Reynolds and her residence. So you're going to leave now, or I'm going to call the police and have you removed. Your choice." A tense silence followed, then the sound of retreating footsteps and the elevator doors opening and closing. A gentle knock came at my door. "He's gone," Tom confirmed when I opened it. "But I'd recommend calling your attorney to report the violation of the TRO." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I really appreciate your help." After Tom returned to his apartment, I called Ellen and reported the incident as he'd suggested. She promised to file a notice with the court first thing in the morning and recommended I document any further contact attempts. I canceled dinner with Denise, suddenly exhausted by the day's emotional roller coaster. Instead, I ordered delivery, took a long bath, and tried to process everything that had happened in the courtroom. Jason's family turning against him. The journal's confirmation of his calculated deception. His appearance at my door, still believing he could talk his way out of the situation if only given the chance. As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror, really saw myself, perhaps for the first time in years. The woman looking back at me appeared tired but strangely luminous, as if layers of fog had lifted from around her. I touched my reflection gently, tracing the contours of my face. "You're going to be okay," I whispered to myself. Better than okay. And for the first time since the marriage began unraveling, I truly believed it. Morning arrived with soft September light filtering through my bedroom curtains. I had slept deeply and dreamlessly, my body and mind apparently requiring recovery after the intensity of the hearing. My phone showed 3 missed calls from a blocked number, Jason most likely, and a text from Ellen confirming she had filed the TRO violation report. I made coffee and carried it to my small balcony, a luxury in my new apartment that I cherished. The street below was quiet. Just a few early joggers and people walking dogs. 2 blocks away, I could see the morning rush beginning at the popular corner cafe. My thoughts drifted to the long path that had led me to this moment. The first year of marriage had been happy, or at least I had believed it was. We traveled, entertained, built what I thought was a partnership. The subtle shifts began so gradually that I hardly noticed them, Jason questioning my memory of conversations, suggesting my perceptions of situations were overly emotional, making decisions we should have made together and then insisting we had discussed them. By our 2nd anniversary, I had developed the habit of secretly recording our important conversations so I could replay them later, assuring myself I wasn't misremembering as he often claimed. I kept notes in an app disguised as a shopping list, documenting discrepancies in his stories about late nights at work or business trips. I became my own private investigator, trying to confirm that I wasn't crazy, that the inconsistencies I perceived were real. The breaking point came 9 months ago, when I discovered documents for a property in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, a lakefront home purchased in the name of Jason's business partner, but with our marital funds. When confronted, Jason had exploded in a calculated rage, turning the situation around to attack me for snooping and never trusting him. He stormed out, and I spent the night alternating between tears and a growing sense of clarity. The next morning, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. I began gathering evidence methodically: bank statements, property records, text messages, emails. I recorded conversations when legal, documented everything when I couldn't record. I quietly opened my own bank account and began setting aside small amounts from my consulting income. It was during this period that Eleanor had reached out, initially just for lunch, to understand what was happening with you and Jason. That lunch had turned into a 3-hour conversation where she gradually revealed her own suspicions about her son's behavior and her growing concern as she recognized patterns similar to those she had experienced with Jason's father decades earlier. "History repeats itself," she had said sadly. "I thought I had raised him differently, but the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Her support had been unexpected, but invaluable, particularly her willingness to testify about what she had witnessed. Jason never imagined his family would turn against him. His confidence in their loyalty had been absolute, making yesterday's testimony all the more devastating to his case. My coffee finished, I returned inside to prepare for the day ahead. A text from my older sister Claire appeared. "Just checking in. How are you feeling after yesterday?" "Strangely peaceful," I replied honestly. "Like I can finally see the path forward clearly." "Proud of you," she texted back with a heart emoji. Claire had been skeptical of Jason from the beginning, though she had kept her concerns mostly to herself out of respect for my choices. When everything began to unravel, she had been my rock, offering practical support and emotional validation when I needed it most. I showered and dressed in jeans and a soft sweater, embracing the casual comfort I had denied myself during the marriage. Jason had preferred me in more formal attire, even at home. "You never know who might stop by," he would say, though in retrospect, his concern was more about maintaining control over my appearance than about unexpected visitors. My phone rang as I was making breakfast. Ellen's name flashed on the screen. "I just received a call from Jason's attorney," she said without preamble. "They're requesting an emergency hearing this afternoon." "What? Why?" I felt my stomach tighten with anxiety. Apparently, Jason is claiming his mother and sister were coerced into giving their testimony yesterday. He's demanding the opportunity to cross-examine them and to present evidence of undue influence. "That's ridiculous," I said, sinking into a kitchen chair. "They testified voluntarily." "Of course it's ridiculous," Ellen agreed. "It's a desperate tactic from someone watching his case implode. The judge is unlikely to entertain it, but we need to be prepared just in case." "Can you meet me at my office at noon?" "I'll be there," I promised, already mentally rescheduling my day. After hanging up, I sat quietly, processing this new development. Jason was flailing, throwing whatever he could at the wall in hopes something would stick. It was the legal equivalent of his gaslighting techniques, creating confusion, casting doubt, attempting to undermine credible testimony through sheer force of personality and persistence. But unlike in our marriage, where I had been isolated and vulnerable to his manipulations, in the courtroom, his tactics were transparent to trained legal professionals. His family's testimony had been clear and consistent, supported by documentation. His claims of coercion would fall apart under scrutiny. Still, the emergency hearing request was a stark reminder that Jason wouldn't go down without a fight. He had too much at stake, financially and in terms of his carefully constructed public image. The coming weeks would likely bring more desperate attempts to regain control of the situation. I opened my laptop and began documenting last night's incident at my door in detail, as Ellen had instructed. The facts, laid out chronologically, without emotional coloring. Just as I had trained myself to do over the past year, creating an irrefutable record of reality to counter Jason's distortions. By the time I finished, a strange calm had settled over me. Whatever tactics Jason employed, whatever lies he constructed, the truth had begun its inevitable emergence. His own mother and sister had stood in a courtroom and exposed his deception under oath. The forensic accounting would reveal the financial truths he had worked so hard to hide. And I, the woman he had systematically attempted to diminish and control, was finally standing firmly in my own power, guided by clarity rather than confusion. The journal Eleanor had given me still sat on my dining table. After a moment's consideration, I picked it up and placed it in my bag to take to Ellen's office. Whatever reservations I had about using it, Jason's latest maneuver had resolved them. His journal wasn't just a record of his deception. It was a roadmap to the financial evidence the forensic accountants would need to uncover everything he had hidden. Outside, the September day had blossomed into full autumn glory. Crisp air, golden sunlight, leaves just beginning to hint at the changes to come. I locked my apartment and headed toward the elevator, ready to face whatever the afternoon might bring. The woman who had once doubted her own perceptions, who had shrunk herself to fit within the confines of Jason's expectations, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who recognized her worth and demanded the respect and honesty she deserved. Whatever happened in court today or in the weeks to come, that transformation was the victory that mattered most, one that no legal maneuver or desperate tactic could take away. The emergency hearing proved to be exactly what Ellen had predicted. A desperate flailing by a man watching his carefully constructed facade crumble. Judge Harmon's patience visibly thinned as Jason's attorney presented their claims of coercion and undue influence regarding Eleanor and Meredith's testimony. Your Honor, Jason's attorney argued, we have reason to believe Mrs. Barrett was improperly influenced by the plaintiff. We request the opportunity to present evidence of this alleged manipulation. And what evidence would that be, Counselor? Judge Harmon asked, her tone making it clear she was skeptical. What followed was a rambling explanation about Eleanor's history of emotional instability and supposed financial dependence on Jason, claims that Eleanor herself refuted when called to the stand. Mr. Barrett has never provided financial support to me, she stated firmly. Following my divorce from his father 15 years ago, I invested my settlement wisely and have been financially independent ever since. As for emotional instability, that's simply a tactic my ex-husband used to discredit me when I finally stood up to his controlling behavior, a tactic my son apparently learned well. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as Jason shifted in his seat, his earlier confidence now replaced by barely concealed anger. When his attorney attempted to question Meredith about secret meetings with me, she calmly explained that she had approached me, not the other way around, after witnessing Jason's manipulative behavior at a family gathering. Olivia didn't seek me out, Meredith testified. I contacted her after I overheard my brother bragging to a friend about how he had convinced her she was crazy for questioning his late nights. It reminded me too much of what my father did to my mother for years. I couldn't stay silent. By the time Jason himself took the stand, attempting to paint a picture of a conspiracy against him, Judge Harmon had clearly heard enough. Mr. Barrett, she interrupted, the court has heard consistent testimony from multiple witnesses, supported by documentation, regarding your behavior. Your own mother and sister have testified under oath about witnessing your deceptive practices. Unless you have substantive evidence to counter their specific claims, not vague allegations of conspiracy, I see no reason to discount their testimony. Jason's face flushed with anger. They're lying, he insisted. Olivia has always been manipulative. She turned my family against me. This is all part of her plan to— Mr. Barrett, the judge cut in sharply. I advise you to be very careful about making unsubstantiated accusations in my courtroom. Thus far, the only evidence of manipulation I've seen has been documented in your own behavior. The hearing concluded with Judge Harmon not only rejecting Jason's claims, but expanding the scope of the forensic accounting investigation to include his business partnerships and overseas transactions. She also extended the temporary restraining order after hearing about his appearance at my apartment. The court takes violations of protective orders very seriously, Mr. Barrett, she warned. Any further incidents will result in significant consequences. As we gathered our things to leave, I caught Eleanor's eye across the courtroom. She gave me a small, sad nod, not triumphant, but resolute. This couldn't be easy for her, testifying against her own son, but her commitment to truth had proven stronger than family loyalty. Outside the courthouse, Ellen squeezed my arm gently. That couldn't have gone better for us, she said quietly. Jason's credibility is in tatters, and the judge clearly sees through his tactics. What happens now? I asked, watching as Jason stormed down the courthouse steps, his attorney hurrying to keep pace. Now the forensic accountants do their work, Ellen explained. Based on what we've already uncovered and what's in that journal you provided, I expect they'll find significant hidden assets. When they do, the court will likely include those in the marital estate to be divided, regardless of how Jason tried to shield them. The validation felt strangely hollow. Yes, I had been right about Jason's deception. Yes, the truth was finally coming to light. But standing on those courthouse steps, watching my husband, the man I had once loved enough to pledge my life to, rage against the consequences of his own actions, I felt only a profound sadness for what might have been. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to my life. The forensic accounting investigation proceeded methodically, with occasional requests for additional documentation or clarification. I threw myself into my work, grateful for the consulting projects that kept my mind occupied and my bank account stable. Friends I hadn't seen in months or even years began to reappear in my life as I cautiously reached out, rebuilding connections Jason had systematically undermined. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged, people who had chosen sides or simply drifted too far away during my years of increasing isolation. But others welcomed me back with open arms and without judgment. We knew something was off. My college roommate Tara told me over coffee one rainy October afternoon. The way you gradually disappeared from our lives, always with perfect excuses about being busy or traveling for Jason's work. But you seemed so happy on social media, we figured maybe you'd just outgrown us. Social media was part of the performance, I admitted, remembering the carefully curated photos of our seemingly perfect life that Jason had insisted on posting regularly. The happier things looked from the outside, the less anyone would question what was happening behind closed doors. The conversation with Tara was one of many healing moments as I gradually reclaimed my narrative, sharing my experience not as a victim seeking pity, but as a survivor finding her way back to authenticity. Each honest exchange helped dissolve the shame that had kept me silent for so long. Even my relationship with Eleanor evolved into something unexpected. Not quite friendship, but a mutual respect born from shared experience. We met occasionally for lunch, careful to keep our conversations focused on the present and future, rather than rehashing Jason's betrayals. I've decided to sell the Lake Forest house, she told me during one such lunch in early November. Too many memories, too much space for just me. I'm looking at condos downtown, near the Art Institute. That sounds perfect for you, I said, genuinely pleased by her decision to prioritize her own happiness. A fresh start. That's exactly what it is, she agreed, her eyes brighter than I'd ever seen them. Something I should have done years ago, instead of maintaining appearances in a mausoleum of a marriage. Her words resonated deeply. How much of my life with Jason had been about maintaining appearances? The perfect wife, the perfect home, the perfect social calendar, all while something essential in me was slowly dying. Never again, I promised myself. Whatever life I built moving forward would be authentic, even if imperfect. The forensic accounting results arrived on a crisp December morning, delivered to Ellen's office in a thick envelope of documentation that confirmed our suspicions and then some. Jason had hidden assets in offshore accounts, purchased property through shell companies, and systematically diverted marital funds into investments held in associates' names. "This is even more extensive than we anticipated," Ellen said as we reviewed the findings together. "The good news is that with this level of documented deception, the court is likely to rule very favorably regarding the division of assets. Judge Harmon does not look kindly on attempts to hide marital property." I nodded, studying the numbers that represented years of calculated betrayal. "What's the timeline from here?" "We have a final hearing scheduled for January 15th. Given this report, Jason's attorney will likely push for settlement negotiations before then. They know how damaging this will be if fully presented in open court." She was right. 2 days later, we received a settlement offer, one that included significantly more than the prenuptial agreement had specified, though still less than an equitable division of the now uncovered assets. "It's their opening position," Ellen explained. "We'll counter." The negotiation process unfolded over the following weeks, a clinical dissection of a 7-year relationship reduced to dollar amounts and property valuations. Through it all, I remained steadfast in my demand for fairness rather than punishment. I didn't want to destroy Jason. I simply wanted what was rightfully mine after years of contributing to our marriage, while he secretly prepared to leave me with nothing. 3 days before Christmas, we reached a settlement. The prenuptial agreement was set aside due to Jason's documented deception and failure to disclose assets. I would receive half of our marital property, including my fair share of the previously hidden accounts and investments, plus the apartment in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood that we had purchased 2 years earlier. "Are you satisfied with this outcome?" Ellen asked as I signed the final paperwork. I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said finally. "It's fair, and more importantly, it's over." Walking out of her office that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't fully acknowledged I was carrying. The divorce wouldn't be officially finalized until after the new year, but the hardest part, the confrontation, the exposure of truth, the negotiation of terms, was behind me. Outside, Chicago had transformed into a winter wonderland, fresh snow blanketing the city in pristine white. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, face tilted up to catch snowflakes on my cheeks, breathing in the cold, clean air. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the future stretched before me not as something to fear or endure, but as a blank canvas waiting to be filled with possibilities of my own choosing. January brought the official end to my marriage. A brief procedural hearing where the judge reviewed our settlement agreement, asked if we both understood its terms, and with the strike of a gavel, dissolved the legal bond between us. Jason attended with a new attorney, his demeanor subdued compared to previous hearings. He avoided eye contact, answering the judge's questions in clipped monosyllables before exiting quickly when the proceedings concluded. I lingered in the courtroom after he left, absorbing the finality of the moment. 7 years of my life, from our first meeting to this quiet dissolution, now officially relegated to the past tense. I was no longer Jason Barrett's wife, no longer entangled in his deceptions, no longer questioning my own perceptions under the weight of his manipulations. "How do you feel?" Ellen asked as we walked out together. "Like I'm waking up from a very long dream," I replied honestly. "Some parts beautiful, some parts nightmare, but all of it somehow not quite real now that I'm on the other side." She squeezed my hand. "That's a healthy perspective. Just remember, healing isn't linear. There might be days when it all comes rushing back." "I know," I acknowledged, "but at least now I have the tools to recognize what's happening and work through it." Outside, Chicago had settled into deep winter. The sky a clear, cold blue, the air sharp with each breath. I declined Ellen's offer of a celebratory lunch, preferring to mark this transition privately. Instead, I walked through Millennium Park, watching ice skaters circle the rink while contemplating the blank page of my future. The financial settlement meant I had breathing room, time to decide my next steps without immediate pressure. The Gold Coast apartment would be transferred to my name within 30 days. Half of our investment portfolio and retirement accounts were already being moved to my separate accounts. The structures of my material life were falling into place with surprising efficiency. It was the emotional architecture that required more careful consideration. That evening, I met Claire for dinner at a quiet neighborhood restaurant I'd never visited during my marriage, one of many small freedoms I was reclaiming, the ability to discover places without filtering them through Jason's preferences. To new beginnings, my sister said, raising her wine glass, and to the return of the real Olivia. I smiled, clinking my glass against hers. Is it strange that I'm not entirely sure who that is anymore? I spent so many years adapting to Jason's expectations that I've lost track of my own authentic preferences. Then consider this your rediscovery phase, Claire suggested. Try everything. Say yes to experiences. Figure out what actually resonates with the person you are now, not who you were before Jason or who you became during the marriage. Her advice resonated deeply. I had entered the relationship with Jason at 27, old enough to have established a sense of self, but young enough that it remained malleable. Now, at 34, I had the opportunity to rediscover and redefine who I wanted to be moving forward. I've been thinking about making a career change, I admitted, something I hadn't shared with anyone yet. The healthcare tech marketing has been stable, but it never truly excited me. What would excite you? Claire asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Remember how I used to write all the time in college? Feature articles for the campus magazine, creative pieces, even that blog I maintained for a while? I felt a spark of enthusiasm as I spoke about this long-abandoned passion. I've been thinking about freelance writing, maybe focusing on women's issues or workplace culture. That sounds perfect for you, Claire said warmly. You've always had a gift for putting complex emotional experiences into words. Jason thought writing was a hobby, not a viable career path, I said, recognizing another way he had subtly steered me away from my authentic interests. He encouraged me to focus on marketing because it was practical and stable. Well, Jason isn't calling the shots anymore, Claire pointed out, and with the settlement, you have the financial cushion to explore this without immediate pressure to replace your current income. By the time dinner ended, I had committed to giving myself 6 months to explore writing opportunities before making any definitive career decisions. It was a small step, but it felt monumental, the first significant life choice I'd made entirely for myself in years. February arrived with a snowstorm that blanketed the city, followed by a bone-chilling cold snap that kept most Chicagoans indoors. I used the enforced hibernation productively, setting up a small office space in the spare bedroom of my Bucktown apartment and beginning to flesh out ideas for potential articles. The writing came haltingly at first, my voice rusty from disuse, my confidence fragile. But gradually, as the days passed, I found my rhythm. I started a personal blog, anonymous for now, documenting the emotional journey of reclaiming identity after a controlling relationship. To my surprise, it quickly gained a small but engaged readership, women responding with their own stories of awakening and recovery. You've put into words exactly what I've been feeling but couldn't express, one commenter wrote. Thank you for making me feel less alone in this process. These connections, these shared experiences, reinforced my sense that the pain of my marriage could be transformed into something meaningful, not just for my own healing, but potentially to help others navigating similar terrain. Midway through the month, I received an unexpected email from Meredith. Olivia, I hope this finds you well. I've been thinking about you and wondering how you're doing now that everything is finalized. If you're open to it, I'd love to meet for coffee sometime. No pressure, of course. Warmly, Meredith. I hesitated, uncertain about maintaining connections to Jason's family, now that the divorce was complete. But Meredith had shown remarkable courage in testifying truthfully, despite pressure from her brother. After considering it overnight, I replied with a suggestion to meet at a cafe in Lincoln Park the following weekend. The day of our meeting brought unexpectedly mild weather, a brief reprieve from winter's grip. I arrived early, claiming a quiet corner table and ordering a latte while I waited. When Meredith appeared, I was struck by how different she looked outside the tense courtroom setting. Younger, more relaxed, her resemblance to Jason now seeming merely superficial rather than unsettling. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said after ordering her own coffee. "I wasn't sure if you'd want anything to do with the Barrett family after everything that happened." "I've learned not to paint everyone with the same brush," I replied. "You and your mother showed incredible integrity throughout the process." Meredith looked down at her cup, a shadow crossing her features. "That's actually part of what I wanted to talk to you about. Jason hasn't spoken to either of us since the final settlement. He's cut us off completely." Though not entirely surprised, I felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry to hear that. I never wanted to come between him and his family." "You didn't," she assured me quickly. "This is Jason's choice, his response to being held accountable. Mom and I knew the risk when we decided to testify. We don't regret it." We talked for nearly 2 hours, our conversation evolving from the difficult past to our current lives and future hopes. Meredith shared her plans to return to graduate school for a degree in clinical psychology, a path she'd abandoned years earlier under pressure from her father and brother, who had dismissed it as impractical. "Watching you stand up for yourself inspired me," she admitted. "If you could rebuild after everything Jason put you through, I could certainly reclaim my own dreams." As we parted with a genuine hug, I realized that something unexpected had emerged from the wreckage of my marriage, authentic connections with women who understood the complex dynamics of manipulation and control because they had witnessed them firsthand within their own family. "We should do this again," I suggested, meaning it sincerely. "I'd like that," Meredith agreed. "And maybe next time Mom could join us. She's been asking about you." "I'd like that too," I said, surprised to discover it was true. Walking home, I reflected on how healing often comes from unexpected directions. The very family I had once desperately sought approval from, that I had bent myself into uncomfortable shapes to please, now offered friendship based on mutual respect and shared understanding. But only after I had found the courage to stand firmly in my own truth. March brought the transfer of the Gold Coast apartment into my name, requiring a meeting with the property management company to update their records. I had been avoiding the apartment since moving out months earlier, knowing it would trigger memories I wasn't ready to process. But now, with legal ownership established, I needed to decide whether to move back in or sell it. The doorman greeted me warmly as I entered the building, either not aware of or tactfully ignoring the changed circumstances. "Good to see you, Mrs. Barrett," he said before catching himself. "I'm sorry, should I say Ms. Reynolds now?" "Ms. Reynolds is perfect," I confirmed with a smile. "Thank you, Eduardo." The apartment was exactly as I remembered. Spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, tastefully decorated in the neutral palette Jason had insisted upon. "Resale value," he had explained when dismissing my preference for more colorful accents. "Buyers want a blank canvas." I moved through the room slowly, running my fingers along familiar surfaces, opening cabinets and closets still containing items I'd left behind in my hurried departure. In the master bedroom, I found clothes I hadn't missed, jewelry I'd forgotten, books I'd never finished reading. Each discovery felt like encountering artifacts from someone else's life, recognizable but no longer connected to my current reality. By the time I reached the second bedroom, which Jason had used as a home office, I had made my decision. This apartment, despite its objective beauty and value, held too many memories of the person I had been while living here. Someone diminished, doubtful, gradually disappearing into the background of her own life. No amount of redecorating could exorcise those ghosts. I contacted a real estate agent that afternoon and listed the apartment the following week. The hot Chicago market meant multiple offers within days, and by month's end, I had accepted a bid well above asking price. The proceeds, combined with my portion of the settlement, created a financial foundation that would support my writing exploration for significantly longer than the 6 months I had initially planned. As I signed the closing documents in early April, I felt another link to my marriage life fall away. Not painfully, but with the quiet relief of setting down a burden I no longer needed to carry. "Congratulations," the real estate agent said, handing me a copy of the finalized sale documents. "Any plans for your newfound liquidity?" "Actually, yes," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I'm considering buying a small place in Maine, a cottage near the ocean where I can write." The idea had formed gradually over the preceding weeks as I'd reconnected with my love of writing. Chicago had been my home for 12 years, but it now felt saturated with memories of my life with Jason, both the good early days and the painful latter ones. The thought of a complete geographic change, somewhere quiet and beautiful where I could focus entirely on building my new life, had taken root and flourished. That evening, I called Claire to share my emerging plan. "Am I crazy to consider such a big move?" I asked after outlining my thoughts. "Leaving Chicago? Starting completely fresh somewhere new?" "Not crazy at all," she responded without hesitation. "Sometimes a physical fresh start supports the emotional one, and you've always loved the ocean." "I have," I agreed, remembering childhood summers spent on East Coast beaches, the peace I'd always found near water. "And real estate in some of the smaller coastal towns is surprisingly affordable compared to Chicago." "Just promise me one thing," Claire said. "Make sure you're running toward something you want, not just away from painful memories. The difference matters." Her insight, as always, cut to the heart of the matter. Was this potential move an escape or a positive choice? The question lingered as I began researching Maine coastal communities, property values, and what it might mean to build a life so different from the urban existence I'd known for my entire adult life. By the end of April, I had narrowed my search to a few promising areas and planned a trip to explore them in person. Whether this particular dream would materialize remained uncertain, but the very act of considering such a significant change represented a victory. The reclamation of my right to imagine and pursue a future shaped by my own desires rather than someone else's expectations. As spring gradually softened Chicago's winter edges, I found myself increasingly drawn to the water, spending weekends walking along the lakeshore, watching the shifting moods of Lake Michigan as it transitioned from winter's gray severity to spring's more gentle aspects. In these quiet moments, breathing in the freshness of possibility, I began to understand that healing wasn't just about processing what had happened to me. It was about reclaiming the capacity to dream, to desire, to move confidently toward a horizon of my own choosing. The woman who had once shrunk herself to fit within the narrow confines of Jason's approval was gone. In her place stood someone both familiar and new, a self-rediscovered, reclaimed, and increasingly at peace with both her scars and her strength. Maine in early June was exactly what I needed. The coastal air crisp and clean, small towns emerging from winter's quiet into the gentle bustle of pre-tourist season. I spent a week driving along winding shoreline roads, meeting with real estate agents, and exploring communities from Kennebunkport to Camden. Halfway through my trip, I found it, a small cottage on a rocky outcropping just outside of Booth Bay Harbor. Built in the 1930s, it had been lovingly maintained but never aggressively modernized, retaining the character and charm that had first drawn me to coastal New England architecture. 2 bedrooms, a sunroom facing the water, and a small deck where I could imagine drinking morning coffee while watching the tide shift. "It needs some updates," the real estate agent cautioned as we walked through. The kitchen is functional but dated, and the bathroom could use a refresh. I ran my hand along the original beadboard in the hallway, peered out windows framing perfect ocean views, and felt something settle in my chest. "It's perfect," I said, surprising both of us with the certainty in my voice. "I'd like to make an offer." The negotiation went smoothly, and by the time I returned to Chicago, I was under contract for my main cottage, with a closing date set for mid-July. The timeline felt right, giving me enough time to wrap up loose ends in Chicago while planning the logistics of my cross-country move. "I'm really doing this," I told Claire over the phone, equal parts excited and terrified. "Completely changing my life." "You already changed your life," she reminded me gently. "This is just changing your location to match the internal shift that's already happened." 1 week before my planned departure from Chicago, I received an unexpected text from Eleanor Barrett. "In town for a gallery opening tomorrow evening. Would love to see you before you leave for Maine. Coffee or lunch?" We met at a small cafe near the Art Institute, where Eleanor had become a regular presence since moving downtown after selling the Lake Forest house. Her whole demeanor had transformed over the past months, more relaxed, more authentically herself, with a vibrancy that made her appear years younger than when I'd first met her as Jason's mother. "Maine suits you," she said after we exchanged updates. "I can already see the excitement in your eyes." "It feels right," I admitted. "A completely fresh start." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about fresh starts too." She hesitated before continuing. "I've met someone. Nothing serious yet, but promising." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased for her. "Anyone I know?" "A professor of art history I met through my volunteer work at the museum. Recently widowed, kind, intellectual." She smiled almost shyly. "Very different from Jason's father or any man I've known, really." We talked for nearly 2 hours, no longer bound by the awkwardness of our former relationship, but connected by mutual respect and the shared experience of reclaiming our lives after years of diminishment. "I wanted to give you something before you leave," Eleanor said as our meeting drew to a close. She pulled a small wrapped package from her purse and placed it on the table between us. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a compass rose. "To remind you that you always know your true north now," she explained, "no matter what storms may come." I fastened it around my wrist, unexpectedly moved by the gesture. "Thank you. For everything. The bracelet, the testimony, the truth." "Truth is the least we owe each other," she said simply. I just wish I'd embraced that principle sooner. As we parted with a warm hug, I marveled at the strange alchemy of life. How this woman, once an intimidating figure in my marriage, had become a genuine friend and ally through the very process of its dissolution. The drive to Maine took 3 days, my small SUV packed with essentials while movers transported the bulk of my belongings. I took a deliberately scenic route, stopping in small towns along the way, eating at local diners, staying in charming B&Bs, each mile putting physical distance between me and the life I had shared with Jason. I arrived in Boothbay Harbor on a perfect July afternoon, the sky a brilliant blue, the harbor dotted with sailboats. The cottage keys were waiting at the real estate office, along with a welcome basket from the agent and a folder of information about local services. The previous owners left some basics in the pantry, the agent mentioned, and I took the liberty of having the power and water turned on yesterday. You should be all set for your first night. That evening, I sat on the small deck watching the sunset transform the sky and water into a canvas of orange and pink. In the distance, a lighthouse blinked its steady rhythm, a reminder of constancy amid change. The salt air carried the scent of pine and seaweed, so different from Chicago's urban landscape. A profound sense of rightness settled over me. Not happiness exactly, at least not yet, but a certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Arrived safely? How's the cottage?" I sent back a photo of the sunset view with the simple caption, "Home." August brought warm days and the steady rhythm of small-town life. I established routines, morning coffee on the deck, afternoons writing in the sunroom, evening walks along the shore. My blog continued to grow, attracting enough attention that I received my first offer to write a guest piece for an online women's magazine focusing on resilience after relationship trauma. The movers arrived with the rest of my belongings, and I gradually transformed the cottage into my own space, hanging art I loved, arranging books on built-in shelves, placing family photos in simple frames. I painted the kitchen a soft sage green, replaced dated fixtures in the bathroom, and splurged on luxurious bedding for the master bedroom. Each small change represented a choice made solely for my own pleasure. No compromise required, no need to consider someone else's preferences or judgment. After years of second-guessing every decision, the freedom was both exhilarating and occasionally overwhelming. I made connections in my new community gradually, joining the local library's book club, attending a weekly yoga class at the community center, becoming a regular at the farmer's market every Saturday. People were friendly but not intrusive, offering the perfect balance of welcome and privacy that allowed me to integrate at my own pace. In September, I received an email from a literary agent who had discovered my blog. "Your voice is compelling," she wrote. "Have you considered expanding your writing into a book-length memoir about emotional recovery and rebuilding identity after a controlling relationship?" The idea hadn't occurred to me, but once planted, it took root and flourished. I began outlining chapters, exploring how my personal experience might be structured into a narrative that could help others navigating similar terrain. The project gave my days even more purpose and direction as summer faded into a spectacular New England autumn. One crisp October afternoon, as I worked on my book outline in the local coffee shop, my phone lit up with a notification I never expected. A LinkedIn message from Jason. My heart stuttered briefly before settling back into its regular rhythm. "Olivia, I've been doing intensive therapy for the past 6 months. I owe you an apology for my behavior during our marriage and divorce. If you're willing, I'd appreciate the opportunity to make amends. No pressure or expectation." I stared at the message for a long moment, considering how different my reaction was now compared to how it might have been even 6 months earlier. There was no urge to respond immediately, no anxiety about what he might think if I didn't, no compulsion to manage his feelings or expectations. Just a calm acknowledgement that he had reached out and that I could decide on my own timeline whether engaging served my well-being. After careful consideration over the next few days, I crafted a brief, honest reply. "Jason, I appreciate your message and the work you're doing in therapy. I'm not interested in direct communication at this time, but I wish you well on your journey toward healthier relationships." Simple, clear boundaries without cruelty. Exactly the kind of response that would have been impossible for me to formulate during our marriage, when every interaction was colored by my desire to please him or fear of his reaction. That evening, I walked along the shore as the setting sun painted the clouds in shades of gold and crimson. The tide was coming in, waves washing over rocks that had been exposed just hours earlier. Nature's constant reminder that change is the only permanence, that even the most dramatic transformations happen one small shift at a time. I touched the compass rose charm on my bracelet, thinking about true north and the journey I had navigated from the woman who entered that courtroom nearly a year ago, terrified but determined, to the person I was becoming now. Not defined by what had happened to me, but by how I had chosen to reclaim and rebuild my life in its aftermath. The path hadn't been straight or easy. There had been days of doubt, moments of grief for what might have been, occasional anger at the years I had lost to someone else's manipulation. But those emotions no longer dominated my landscape. They had become simply weather passing through a sky that remained, at its core, steadily clearing. As darkness fell and the lighthouse beam began its reassuring sweep across the water, I turned toward home. My home. Created entirely on my terms, with the quiet certainty that while my story with Jason had ended, my own story continued to unfold with possibilities I was only beginning to imagine. The final page had turned on that chapter of betrayal and loss. But the book itself? It was still being written, one authentic choice at a time.